Hello, and thank you for joining us again today on the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast with me, Errol Lawson, where we're so passionate about bringing inspirational leaders from around the world, Christian leaders in business, in church ministry, in the marketplace, who are doing great things for the glory of God. We want you to hear their stories, hear their lessons learned, hear their journeys, and be inspired to take your personal leadership to the next level. I'm confident that every single leadership episode is going to inspire you to be the very best that you can be. Now, I really encourage you to go back and listen to previous episodes. Like, we've done so many interviews now, men and women from across the world who are doing great things for God. Go back and listen to the interviews. You can check out our page at www.therisinggenerationpodcast.com or go to our iTunes page and listen there if you're on Apple, or our Stitcher page if you're on Android, and listen to our previous episodes. Some great nuggets of wisdom waiting there for you. Also ask that you go to our iTunes page or Stitcher page and give us maybe a 4 or 5 star rating if you enjoy the podcast. And the more ratings you get, the more we go up the rankings, and of course the more listeners that we'll get. And so we'd really appreciate your help with that. Now, if you're listening today as well and you get some kind of, you're going to be stirred and you're getting some questions that are coming up for you and you want some more support, please feel free to email me directly. And my email is errol@errollawson.com. Email me and we do a question, and I'll be happy to offer you some support if I can do. Or maybe you want some coaching. And what we're doing right now is we're offering a free 30 to 45 minute coaching session with anybody out there. Maybe you're a leader, you're a pastor, you're a lay leader, you're an entrepreneur or a business owner, and you want some coaching around an issue or a question that has arisen for you as you've been listening to the podcast. So please feel free to email me. We'll get you booked in. If you're wondering what coaching is, it's not counseling, it's not mentoring as such. It's more me sitting down with you, whether in person, if you're local, or over Skype, and to simply have a conversation and asking you questions to help you get the clarity you're looking for in your business, ministry, or with an idea you're working on right now. Yeah, so it's completely free of charge, no obligation at all. But feel free to email me at errol@errollawson.com, and we'll get you booked in right away. All right, so get ready to enjoy this next episode. I pray that you'll enjoy it, and please share with your friends or your colleagues or someone you think might also benefit from hearing this great interview. Thank you for listening again. God bless you. Hello, and thank you for joining me on today's podcast. With me today, I have Pastor Jason Alexander. Jason is the executive pastor at Audacious Church in Manchester. Jason, thank you for joining us today. Please go ahead and give us a bit of a background. Tell us your bio, what you're about, where you're from, and give us a bit of a glimpse into what you're doing right now in the world.
Yeah, no problem. So currently, as you mentioned, I'm the executive pastor at Audacious Church. I've been here now on staff in Manchester for the last 15 months. Moved up here with my wife, Kim, and our 3 kids, Georgia, Alexa, and Joey, and a loving life in Manchester. So my role here is overseeing all of the ministry areas of church, which includes everything from kids, youth, young adults, our seniors, also our community arm of the church with all of our A teams, everything we do there, right across our mandate, worship team, pastoral care, and then all of our conferences as well. So Bling, Audacious Conference, oversee all of the work there and our mandate as we do with our publishing and our music. So it's pretty much over all of the ministry areas. Obviously, we've got staff in all of those key roles, so I'm not doing all of that work. I don't take the credit for it, but oversee all of the leadership. My role predominantly is really raising up the leaders within all of those areas, making sure we've got great ministry health across the board, training, discipleship, all of the development of those leadership pathways in the life of the church. And also functioning as executive pastor as supporting and releasing Pastor Glenn and Pastor Soph in what they're called to globally, which is a huge thing. That is a great vision on their life, and they've been in ministry now here in the UK for the last 20 years in different forms, and so they're very well known both here in the UK, right across Europe and around the world. My role very much releasing them in what they do, and in the past, I guess, started out in working and serving in church from the age of 12, really. Went right through different areas of church life as a youngster, serving in production areas of church music. I was a worship pastor for quite a few years, is where I really started in ministry. I was ordained around about the age of 28, 29 years old. And journey from a professional field in television. I was a producer in television in Australia for a number of years prior to, which was my dream job prior to going into ministry full time. Moved from Australia in 2008, planted a church in Bristol, and was leading that for 6.5 years and transitioned out of that here to Manchester. So I went from being a senior pastor there into being on the senior leadership team here in Manchester with Glenn and Soph, and we're loving it.
Wow, awesome, man. How did you transition from being in the television production world into full-time ministry? Like, tell us that story. How did that transition happen? What was going on for you there?
Yeah, well, I was in the church. We've been one church our whole life, the church I was sort of saved in and raised in. And so my senior pastor for many years had been asking me if I would consider coming on staff at church. I was a worship pastor, and I did that for fully volunteer time. And so we went through many years where my senior pastor was asking me, would you ever consider doing this full time? Spoke into my ministry life and really shaped me as a minister. So, it was a long period where I was quite a reluctant leader. I found many, many excuses as to why ministry life wasn't right for me, and I was quite happy and content doing my own thing, working in a professional field, and then just giving what I had left over out of my time and my energy and my skills to church at the time. So the transition was one over a number of years, and then one that I eventually listened to God and stepped into full-time ministry off the back of that.
And what do you think the lesson there is? Because we're praying really that from our conversations today, those who are listening, maybe leaders, aspiring leaders, emerging leaders, I wonder what's the lesson, do you think, from that experience that might benefit somebody else?
For me personally, the transition, I think probably the biggest hurdle was largely in around, I was in a job which was my dream job. It was a job that I always wanted. I was working in the media. I was working in the creative field. I was a producer in commercial production, working in a marketing area as well. Lots of people contact, lots of creative outlet, which I had elements of as a worship pastor in the church that I grew up in. But for me, I was able in what I was doing to have call my own shots, really. There was a level of knowing if I was going to step into full-time ministry, then it was an all or nothing. So for me, I think personally, probably a little bit of selfishness there in wanting to be able to keep my life compartmentalized a little. Because in the back of my mind, I always had a sense that I was called to ministry, and I was called to give my whole life to building the house of God. But I think in my maturity, it took a little while for me to realise that I couldn't do both. And for some people, their calling is really in the marketplace. It is in those areas where they have influence in what they do. But for me specifically, I knew it was very much a call to give my whole life to building the house of God. So I think probably my biggest hurdle was my pride. And I think there were a lot of practical things in there as well, taking pay cuts to come and work at church. And I was in a field where I was well paid. And as I said, I could call my own shots with where I was heading with that.
Awesome. And was there a significant turning point for you along your leadership journey? You've been in ministry now for a while. A significant turning point or like an aha moment where maybe you were going one way in your leadership journey and something happened, a revelation of some sort, and you started going that way. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, well, as a teenager, I've got a story that's not uncommon. I walked away from God about the age of 15, and I stopped attending church. I got into a wrong friendship group in school and went down a pathway a lot of teenagers find themselves in, areas of drugs and alcohol, and it didn't come back to God then until I was about 19, 20 years old. And so I spent a good 4 or 5 years doing my own thing. It was when I came back, obviously a recommitment of my life. It wasn't for another probably 5 years. I was married. We hadn't had kids yet. Our marriage hit a bit of a crisis about 3 years in, which God was incredibly gracious in that whole situation to both Kim and I. That we're still together is a bit of a miracle, and thank God every day for it. But it was around about age of 25, I was in a prayer meeting, and we were just praying about the future, seeking God for the future. I was working in television at the time and dealing with a lot of baggage from my upbringing. Mum and Dad got divorced when I was very young. My mum got remarried to a great guy, but had a lot of emotional brokenness, I guess you would call it, but that I think a lot of people carry from being part of mixed family, then from different families coming together, but also from a poor relationship with my father growing up, which took its toll. A lot of other things that sort of took its toll. And I eventually came in that prayer meeting and felt there was a real call from God to give everything over. And I thought at that stage, giving everything over was going to be giving over all my time, giving over all my energy, giving over my career choice and my life. But really what it was giving over, and what I realized in that moment when I felt really I handed everything over to God, was I was giving him all my pain, all my hurt, all my disappointments. And he was lightening my load, not trying to burden me in a way. I wasn't taking on things from him that were going to be harder to carry. He was actually trying to lighten my load with what I was burdened with. And it was at that moment that I realized I can really trust God with what the future was, no matter how I could work it out in my own head, what I could work out what my future was, and my future earning potential, my future career choice, and what I felt like I wanted to achieve. I could trust him with all of the bad stuff and the negative stuff, but I could also trust him with the good stuff. And it was in that moment that I really felt the journey took a turn for me, and I think my relationship with God went a lot deeper. Certainly when he healed me in my heart, my relationship with him, that was where I started really drawing in and pressing in. I think that's probably where I really started in earnest my journey with God as a disciple. So my prayer life changed, my reading of the word changed, everything started to then be shaped very much in and around ministry, the way I led worship in church. And I was fully functional in church as well, mine. So during those years, from sort of 20, 25 serving full on in leadership teams in church, was still quite lost and quite disillusioned with things, even though I had a lot of great things going on in my life. That was probably the turning point in that one prayer meeting where I really started to get serious with God.
Wow, that's a powerful story. Thank you for sharing that, man. What's been your biggest challenge in leadership so far?
Probably handling transition. We planted for the church we were part of 8 years ago when we moved over, just actually almost 8 years ago in Bristol. We moved over from Australia and we planted with the church that we were a part of at the time. And I think you transition in lots of different ways over your life. You transition into different eras of your life where you go from being single to being married. That's a big transition. You go from being married to having kids. That's a big transition. And you become homeowners and you have mortgages and your career choice transitions. They all have an impact on you. I think transitioning from Australia to UK was a big transition for us, and handling that transition as a leader, going from up close sort of leadership relationships at the time into distant ones, and then transition from what was 10 years serving senior pastor there in the church there, who was a father figure, into moving on from there as a transition from Bristol and walking and transitioning out of that leadership, coming from a senior pastor going on to team with someone who was an older brother figure rather than a father figure as a leader, as a senior pastor, which has been amazing, but it's a transition. So I think handling transition is probably one of the key fundamental things is as a leader in your growth, something that I've had to really take to God many, many times for lots of different things in my life. And certainly from a ministry point of view, I think you build a depth and a strength of the weight that you carry as a leader when you handle transition well. Handle it well emotionally, handle it well spiritually, and handle it well for the people who you're leading. So when people watch you in a time of transition, I think it's one of the key areas where the squeeze is really on, where you've got to handle a lot of different things at a lot of different times. Handling the transition of our family, our kids in August of last year, they changed towns, they changed schools, they changed churches. They had a lot of change, which as a father, you have to transition your family well. So I think that's probably one of the key leadership lessons of developing a good understanding of what is good transition.
And what lessons have you learned from transition, from those different, or your most recent ones especially?
I think probably the two biggest traps in transition is discouragement, disappointment, and distraction. There's a lot of things that come on the radar, I think, coming out of the role in my previous role into where we're at now. There was a period of time where we didn't know what was next. So we spent sort of a number of months in limbo, the gap between where you sort of know what the next step is and you've stepped out of what the previous season was. I think it's in that moment where there's a lot of offers on the table. There's a lot of things you could do. I think from a ministry point of view, probably the thing for me was just being able to quieten those distractions around, to be able to just seek God, give God your whole focus, go to the Word, go to prayer, trust God that you can get a word from God and get clarity, where you're not just writing up a pros and a cons list of trying to navigate what the best thing is or what a good thing is, but really going for what God has for you, develops your ability to really trust God. So I think those two things are real key, being able to quieten distractions and really step over the discouragements that hit along the way, because it's very easy when you're vulnerable, you're highly emotional, lots of things shift and change. You've got a lot of opportunity to be offended. I think one of the key passages over the last 2 years for us in transition has been out of the Beatitudes, where Jesus says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And I think keeping a pure heart, sweet spirit, being able to navigate the next part of the journey. If your eyes are going to be on God, then you've got to protect your heart. It's got to stay soft. You can't develop hardness of heart to anything. You've got to make sure you leave baggage in the previous era and not take baggage with you. So yeah, quietening distractions, stepping over discouragements would be probably the two key factors of handling transition well.
That's great, man. Awesome, man. And at this stage in your ministry journey, you've been in ministry a number of years, different contexts. How do you now define success where you are now?
It's a great question. I think defining success is probably one of the most important things to do as a minister, because a lot of the times we judge between what is the outworking of your gift and then what is actually the development of fruit in your life. I think those two things are largely different, but you can get a lot more appreciation, you get a lot more tactile affirmation out of exercising your gift, and not a lot out of what comes from the development of your fruit. But it's only your fruit, I think, that is part of what you gauge with success. So I can only attribute that to the environment of how I raised my kids. I've got 3 beautiful kids. George is 17 now, Alexa's 16, and Joseph's 12. And I look at them, and as a father, I look at, well, what does success look like as a father with them? And I have to bring it all back to, I want them to be disciples of Jesus Christ. I want them out of my life, and what I could be a great friend to them, but they're going to have lots of friends. I could be a confidant, but they'll probably choose a lot of different confidants. I could even be a mentor and a guide for them, but again, they're going to have a lot of influences. But what I promised to them when they were born, and being someone that came from a broken family upbringing, with separation and divorce as part of my upbringing, one of the things I really committed to God with my children was that they'd only have one father. And that was as much a promise to their mum as it was a promise to them, navigate what it was like to be raised in a broken home. So with them, I think the best thing I can offer them is actually lead them to Jesus Christ. So the fruit of their life isn't whether or not Joey or Georgia or Alexa even find themselves in full-time ministry, or they're a preacher, or they're a pastor or a leader in church. The fruit of my fathering of them is that they're fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. So whether they're doctors or lawyers or architects or physiotherapists, or they do the garbage run in Salford, it's irrelevant if they're a fully devoted follower of Christ. That's the fruit of fathering them. That they love Jesus, that they're part of the local church and building the local church, and that's success for me. So I think in how I lead people in church, it's got to be exactly the same. I can work on developing people in their worship leader ability and their leadership development, and function out of communication gifts and exercise creative gifts and those sorts of things. But really success is, are they fully devoted followers of Christ? So that's where my whole focus is, on discipling people, discipling leaders. So I think that's probably the key.
It's great, man. And John Maxwell said that success is hidden in your daily routine. And I know this will change probably every day, but what does the first 90 minutes of your day look like?
Well, It's funny, as people say, as you get older, I'm now 43 years old. As people say, you get older, you transition out of being not a night person. So in your teenage years, as your younger years, you're kind of able to stay on late into the evening. You do sort of creative work late in the evenings and you stay up late and you're not a morning person. But as you get older, it transitions, you become more of a morning person and not a late night person. Unfortunately for me, the two have crept in and I'm neither a late night person or an early morning person. My routine would start at around about 5:30, 6 o'clock most mornings, depending on how I got to bed the night before. And they'd start with prayer. They'd start with being in the Word. I've got a number of different devotional tracks that I run at any given time, both app-based and in my Bible. I'm a journaler, so I love journaling. I journal my revelation. I journal my prayer life. I don't sort of journal my day-to-day activities, but I'll journal my journey with God and the revelation that God gives me. So outside of that, once those things are over, within the first hour and a half, most mornings, Monday to Friday, I'm getting the kids ready for school. Even now, I make my kids lunch every morning, so I send them off to school with a packed lunch. And I find having breakfast with my kids is a key important time of the day. The older they get, I realise how much more independent they are, and finding their key precious times for me. So I don't have to. They could probably, out of their own allowance, get school dinners and all those sorts of things. So whether they eat it or not, it's kind of irrelevant. My son doesn't, because he's playing football at lunchtime. Just the process of that for me is really key. So that would be getting them, seeing them out the door in the morning and letting them know I love them, and they go off with the lunch packed by Dad. Is how the day generally starts.
That's great, man. And what are the other key habits that have contributed to your success up to now in leadership?
I'm a reader, so I love reading. I'd have probably anywhere between 4 to 6 books on the go at any one time. So I love reading. I'm not much of a fiction reader. I love biographies. I love books on leadership. Probably my favourite topic, which has been for the last number of years, has been apologetics. Okay. So I'm a big reader of people like John C. Lennox, Alistair McGrath, William Lane Craig, those types of people. I'm an avid reader of those guys who are great people on apologetics. Theology books I love reading as well. So I love reading some of the old classics as well. Dietrich Bonhoeffer and those kinds of guys. Spurgeon, I read. I've got a number of different books by Spurgeon. Lectures to my students is one of my favourites. Only a Prayer Meeting is another one by Spurgeon, which I love going back over and over again. So I do a lot of reading in and around that, which challenges me and challenges my thought, my thinking, and my worldview as well. So that's, I think, probably why apologetics really appeals to me and has done for a number of years now, stretching my capacity to think differently and also challenge how I communicate the gospel and what that looks like in today's culture and society. So
it's great, man. What's your biggest weakness as a leader?
Well, my biggest weakness, I'm easily distracted. Opportunity is probably my biggest distraction. I was raised through the formative years by a mum who always told me I could do anything I wanted to do, which is great. It was a great positive affirmation over my life, but I 100% believe that I could do anything I put my mind to. So call it self-confidence, call it arrogance. It gives me the scope to think, I could try this and I could do that, and there's this opportunity. I could, some of those things are, I'd love to go and do a philosophy degree. I'd love to go and spend 3 months over in a monastery in Italy. So I think probably distraction and prioritizing is probably one of my key things. I've got a strong work ethic. One thing I think I'll never ever be accused of is being lazy. But in the busyness of everything that I do, I think that the priorities of making sure I'm giving myself to the right things and not distracted. And it's not distracted with bad things. It's not distracted necessarily with bad habits. I think my bad habit is the distraction of looking at all the opportunities, giving probably a little bit too much time and consideration to things.
What's your biggest strength?
Yeah.
What's your biggest strength?
Strength, probably Probably discipleship, leading leaders. I think that's probably, you put me in a room full of leaders and in a discipleship environment, that's probably where I come to life. I spend a lot of time on a platform in front of crowds and people and ministering to churches and church leadership teams and in conferences and those kinds of things. But I think where my sweet spot is in a room full of gifted leaders where I can help be part of shaping the discipleship pathway for them and challenging how they think and helping being part of their personal journey is where I think I thrive. So I think my strength is probably in that area, discipling, leading leaders.
Are you seriously fired up about developing leaders and growing your church to the next level? Could you do with someone to help you get some extra clarity or to be a sounding board for your plans and ideas? Great athletes have coaches, so do great leaders. The right leadership coach for you will result in increasing your performance and dramatically increase the results you achieve. Errol is an experienced leadership coach, award-winning author and entrepreneur, and pastor. He has interviewed over 60 of the most influential Christian leaders from around the world for the Rising Generation Leadership podcast, and uses his unique insights, leadership experience, and his passion for the gospel to coach Christian leaders and help them to discover the clarity, confidence, and competence they are looking for. If you're ready to go to the next level, leverage Errol's experience and extensive network of contacts to help grow your ministry or support you in your personal and professional development. To experience the power and benefit of Errol's coaching, contact us now to arrange a free 30-minute strategy session that will help you to understand exactly what your next step needs to be. Email admin@errollawson.com right now to schedule your call.
If you think back to the beginning of your leadership journey, when you first, I know you mentioned the transition from going from the music industry into full-time role, but when you, at the beginning of your journey of going into leadership, so maybe when you were younger than that, what was holding you back from going into leadership, if anything? Probably
sounds maybe even like a bit of a cop-out, but probably my own insecurities. In around it, I think early days, I was very insecure when it came to how I could trust myself. I was very appreciative of the grace of God. But I think for me, knowing my own humanity and my own weakness of who I was, because I've got an addictive nature. I'm either all in or I'm not. And early growing up, that pendulum could swing from one end to the other in a day. So I could be wholly 100% in the morning and wholly out of there in the afternoon, because I'm not a kind of person that does things by halves in my addictive nature. That addictive nature found its outworking in a lot of wrong things as a teenager, but even as an adult, I don't do things by halves. So I think, that's probably the area of focus. That's been a challenge. Going into leadership, knowing that area of weakness in my life, trusting myself that if I was going to put myself in a position where both I'd be a communicator of the gospel, a representative of Jesus Christ as a leader, and someone who was going to influence the church that way, how people would walk their own journeys when I didn't have a confidence journey consistently. Being in exile was a big hurdle for me, trusting myself in that.
That's great. Well, and I imagine that there are many people who are listening right now who can relate to that. Maybe they're at the precipice themselves of going into leadership, or maybe they're not in church-based leadership, but in their career, or they pursue a career and they're thinking, boy, can I even go to that next level? So speak to that person, if you will, speak to that situation in someone's life right now. Seeing over the horizon a leadership opportunity, but knowing in my past there's been some stuff, and maybe in my life there's some insecurities. How did you move past that? How did you overcome that and step into what God had for you?
So I think the whole area of worthiness is a struggle right from the beginning of salvation. So for us, understanding grace is one where we need to realize we don't qualify. From that point of understanding grace and understand it's Jesus Christ that declares us worthy, that's how it flows right through our ministry life. We don't qualify to be used in ministry. We don't qualified to be given gifts of grace by God. It's not because we're perfect, it's because he is.
Amen.
So as we step through that, the Word of God says that you humble yourself and he will lift you up.
Amen.
If we elevate ourselves, God does our job, which is humbling us. The moment that we think we qualify for ministry, where we qualify for advancement or qualify for promotion, where we feel like we're over and above some area of ministry or service in the life of the church, is where we get it very, very wrong. So as we start to get into any kind of ambition and self-promotion, we find ourselves coming into a place where we're very, very dangerous, both to the church and to ourselves. For me, it was more the other, where in trusting myself, which is what I shouldn't do, I was failing to trust God in me. And I think for anyone out there that struggles with being able to trust themselves, or feeling like you were saying, like a fraud, or feeling like you're an imposter, something like, oh, well, if everyone realizes what goes on in my head and the amount of doubt that I have any other given day, you're in good company. Jesus didn't choose a bunch of perfect people to be his disciples. He chose tax collectors and fishermen and broken people that function in every day in trouble, doubt, and disbelief. Even Thomas, I think, he gets a bad rap, poor Thomas, because I think most of us go through the same struggles. And if Jesus was in front of us incarnate with holes in his hands and in a tear in their side, we'd still be in the place where we'd want to be putting our fingers in the holes in our hands to the side. I think we've got to make sure that we understand that the distrust of ourselves shouldn't be a distrust of God. We don't step into it qualified. We don't continue in it qualified. But it's out of that love for God. Jesus declared the very thing is that those who love me will keep my commandments. Often we read that when we read those who love me will keep my commandments. It's like if we keep the commandments, we qualify in love for him, but it's actually the other way around. That Jesus is actually just calling us to a relationship of love, a personal relationship with him that then gives us the ability to follow the commandments, to fulfill righteousness through what he's actually done for us on the cross. So ministry is very much the same. It's no different to the act of salvation and staying in it.
That's great, man. Amen. And we're almost done now. But who have been your three most significant mentors on your leadership journey?
Well, my senior pastor who baptized me, who I was saved under his ministry in our first church that both my wife and I grew up in. He dedicated all our children, married us.
Wow.
He's there for framing everything of the foundational part of my life and my understanding. He shaped my work ethic as a Christian and as a minister. He also told me all the things I didn't want to hear. So my senior pastor, who's been promoted to glory only just in this last 12 months, is an amazing, formative man of God, Pastor Paul Scarf. He would be due the credit of probably the most foundational formation of me as a leader. Pastor Danny Guglielmucci would be the other one. He was my senior pastor for the last 10 years. Incredible man of God, incredible gifted man, and one who has incredible ability to love people, build people up, and the fathering anointing that is on his life. I learnt a wealth of leadership skills and gifts, but also learnt the heart of ministry through Pastor Danny. And then I would have to really give credit, especially in the last number of years. My closest friend in that journey for the last 8 years has really been my senior pastor now, Pastor Glenn. As an older brother figure, as a mentor, and as a very strong voice in my life, someone who's been an incredible encouragement, who's walked the highs and lows of the last 8 years, but someone who's also building a vision that resonates in me. He's one of those people who you really find that Elizabeth and Mary womb leaping of what God's placed in him is the same thing that God's placed in me. Wow. And someone who I don't struggle to follow or get. He's an incredible man of God. And so for Pastor Glenn and Soph and their family, they really are family as well as significant leaders.
Great. Just to dig a bit deeper into those three relationships, what's been the most significant piece of advice that you've gotten from each of those three individuals? So from Pastor Scarf, first of all, then Pastor Danny and Pastor Glenn.
Probably from Pastor Paul, my first senior pastor. I think a genuine love for God's house and giving all, that it's worth it, is probably the one thing from him that I've really understood to be important, because there's many days you get out of bed or you don't want to get out of bed or you don't want to continue in the difficult things. I watched and was mentored by my senior pastor, watching him navigate the church through some really difficult years. And he was a pioneer. So I think the spirit of pioneering is something out of him that I really got. But that what was probably a resounding statement from Pastor Paul was that it's worth it, that everything you've got is worth it. Don't have anything left in the tank. In the end, make sure you spend it all on the house of God. Is a key one with him. Pastor Danny, love people is very much probably the key thing that I've learned from Pastor Danny as a leader. I remember I started as his youth pastor back at the beginning, back in 2004, and I was quite an old youth pastor. I was 30 years old when I became a youth pastor in his church, and I didn't know the first thing about being a youth pastor. I knew what it was to be a worship pastor, which I'd done for many years prior to that. And I remember sitting in my office, and I said, I feel like I'm being set up for a huge fall here, Pastor Danny. I don't know the first thing about it. And he's like the father of youth ministry in Australia, one of the key founders of Youth Alive ever, and someone who was still very much at that stage being asked to speak at all the big youth conferences and on the big youth stages, not just in Australia, but around the world. And I was fearful. I was bricking it. And I said, I don't know what to do next. I don't know what to do first. And he said, just love the kids. That's all I want you to do. If you just love the kids genuinely, I'll teach you the art of ministry. And he very much did that. So that's what gave my whole focus. So loving people. I think if you ever spent any time with Pastor Danny, you'll know that's very much, he's got an ability to wrap his arms around you and make you feel like you're the most important person in the world, and he's never met you before. So that would be here from Glenn. I think one of the key things is being audacious, and that's really in that whole area of courageous faith, having the audacity to believe God at his word and go for the extravagant, the over the top, not settling for the little or compromising for anything less than what God's promises are. I think that's where the essence of wanting to build the church of our dreams is the key statement. Let's build the church of our dreams.
Wow, that's great.
And so that would be the key thing from Glenn.
Awesome. And what's the one thing you're most fired up about right now?
Probably that would be in and around looking at what is going to be our expansion as a church. So taking all of the things, I think we're on a journey at the moment of distilling down the essence of who we are and looking at how we're going to not just replicate that in addition, but how we're going to build a foundation right now that we can build explosive and exponentially, what that looks like. So we can build a strong foundation now that is the platform for our campuses, how we plant out. As a church, we're just about to launch our first proper campus in Chester in February of next year. And I think that's really starting to stir a lot in all of us here at church about what is the foundational platform that we're going to put in place here in our central campus in Manchester. That's really going to be the hub for us to really go to the world with uniquely with who we are as a church. So it's a great time of new, fresh pioneering. And I think anything that's in and around that for me is something that really pushes my buttons.
It's great.
So looking at building the right amount, the right people that fit in that is always the key, because it's not a system or a process that's going to bring breakthrough. It's big people with a great revelation of God. So that's what's really exciting me at the moment.
And is there a book or resource that you'd recommend to an emerging leader or up-and-coming Christian entrepreneur?
A great foundational textbook for me would probably be on leadership, would be The Making of a Leader. It's an incredible textbook for leaders. It's not an easy read, but it's a hugely influential one for my life.
Who's that by? Is that DiMaggio? Or?
Yeah, that's Pastor Frank DiMaggio. as I said, it's probably not a book for the faint-hearted. He's a great Bible teacher. He's a great teacher of leadership, but it's definitely one that's been formative for me. Mm-hmm. And probably where large parts of revelation for me as a Christian leader have come out of books like John Bevere, The Bait of Satan, John Bevere, Undercover. Mm-hmm. They've been key formative ones. Wayne Cadero has been one. Divine Mentor was a revolutionary one for me as a leader, discipling myself in the Word. I think that was probably what revolutionized my idea about what the Word of God can truly do in discipling yourself on a day-to-day basis, and took my devotional life to significant new levels.
Awesome. And just one last question is, there's a lot of young people today that they're growing up, and there's almost a mindset within churches, often preached from some pulpits, that, or the impression is given that the top job, if you like, in Christendom or in the kingdom is a full-time pastor's job, and anything else underneath that is inferior. And so oftentimes they don't see themselves as being able to fulfill whatever dreams or vision or what is that God has placed in them within the church context. Have you found that to be true? Is there any truth in that? How do we address that in this generation?
Yeah, I think it's a huge trap in church life that we make the pinnacle of a development pathway in church as a senior pastor of a church. They're gifts and graces given by God. As you read Ephesians 4, it talks about the apostle, prophet, teacher, evangelist, pastor. They're gifts to equip the church for the work of the ministry. So if we're putting a pastor up there in a church as an Ephesians 4:11 gift, and we're saying that either that or an evangelist or a teacher or an apostle is the pinnacle of that, we're not actually able to grace anyone with that. That's a God-anointed gift and grace work that God gives. And again, they're for equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. The work of the ministry is found in people's workplaces, in their careers, in their home life, in how they raise their families. That's the work of the ministry. So it's the pastor that equips them to be able to do the work of the ministry in that context. So I think that's what I love about our vision as a church, is we're a church that stops the traffic numerically so large that we influence 7 gateways of life, that we empower people in the areas of business and education, entertainment and sports, family and healthcare, all of like politics, media, spirituality. So we're releasing people in that whole area of life to actually minister in the gateway that God's positioned them in. That's their ministry.
Amen.
The assembly point on a Sunday is their recharge moment. It's where we share the word of God together, and we charge ourselves up to go out and be in the ministry area of life from Monday to Saturday. Mm-hmm. I think it'd be a horrible, horrible thing if we had a bunch of senior pastors all sitting in the church together on a Sunday and no one going out and being equipped for the ministry of life. So I think it's one thing that we need to be really careful in our language of what we elevate in church and what we deem is important and valuable in the life of church, because as a reluctant leader, as a reluctant minister in church, I think for me, my struggle was the reverse. I wanted to be out there in the marketplace, and there's still parts of me on my bad days. I'd be lying if I said I didn't leaf through some newspapers over the years and look at jobs back in television and media.
Cool.
And think, oh God, if you just said a word, you wouldn't even have to finish that sentence. I'd be out there doing it. So I think it's great when people feel called and aspire to ministry. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think if any 3 of my kids were to aspire to want to do that one day, and they had the calling and the grace on them to do that I'd fully support them. But right now I've got a daughter that wants to be in medicine. I've got another daughter that wants to do architecture, and they're only a year or 2 off university. My eldest starts university next September, and the next one will follow a year later. And I've got a son that from one day he wants to be a astronaut, a cowboy, a footballer. It changes every day, but I want to empower them to do that well as ministers.
Amen.
So I think we could all do a good work in not just having a language about that, but really committing ourselves to releasing people in there, out in the marketplace.
Awesome, Jason. It's been amazing, man. Thank you for your openness. Thank you for your insight, your wisdom, and just sharing really some of those. I think there's a book in that transition story, by the way.
Oh,
Just all that you shared there. There's a book in you in that subject right there. You said a lot, man. You said a lot. But I'm really thank God for your time today and for sharing so openly. And yeah, man, if there's anything, how do we find out about you? How do we find, if people want to find out about Audacious Church, where do they go?
Go to the website, audaciouschurch.com. You can find everything to do there, whether it's our conferences throughout the year, whether it's our protege internship that we run each year, which is a great area to be able to be discipled in the life of the church and even equipped for your own church. Give a year to God. That's always a great opportunity. You can find out all that information on the website. So you can check out our live streaming. We stream our services every weekend live, which you can get the link from the website as well, and our YouTube connections, all that sort of stuff. So audaciouschurch.com, best way to find us.
Awesome. And you're on Instagram and Twitter and those places. Yep. Jason Alexander.
You'll find us there.
Awesome. Jace, thank you, man. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you, man.
My pleasure, Errol.
Thank you again for joining us today on the Rising Generation Leadership Podcast. I pray you've been inspired, you've been lifted, you've been encouraged to take your personal leadership to the next level. We really encourage you guys to just take action, make it happen, do something, start somewhere, go out and change the world in some way, big or small. Guys, if you've enjoyed the podcast today, please share with your friends, share with your loved ones, your colleagues, someone out there you think might benefit from hearing this great content. And if you want some more questions answering, you got a question, email me, Errol@errollawson.com. Or if you want a free 30 to 45 minute coaching session with myself around the leadership challenge or issue you're working on in your business, your church, or in your organization, please feel free to email me right away. We'll get you booked in. It's Errol@errollawson.com. Thank you again for listening. Go to our iTunes page, check it out, check out the previous episodes. Give us a nice review. That would be awesome. Really appreciate if you could do that for us. We really appreciate you just for being here and listening. Thank you so much. God bless you. We'll see you on the next episode of The Rising Generation.